This election, more than any other election before it, is going to rely on a small demographic of swing voters. Over the last couple weeks, a lot of the momentum in Kamala Harris's campaign has shifted. During her initial announcement with Biden dropping out, she excited everyone. Then in her initial protest reaction, she upset a lot of Gaza activists and leftist members of the party, but garnered support from a lot of liberal pundits. She reversed that dynamic by picking Tim Walz over Josh Shapiro, garnering a ton of support from leftists while upsetting a lot of liberals and some Israel hardliners. Now, Walz has turned out to be a popular pick, but her economic policy proposals also carried that trend, talking about demonopolization and helping people afford homes. But over the last 2 to 3 weeks, Harris has once again shifted that entire dynamic, angering leftists while seeming to be more of a darling to the liberal side of the party. Her defense of Israel, her commitment to keep arming them, her lethal fighting force line, which, by the way, is an old army adage. Like I researched that, but still it was poorly used and it just made the speech way more hawkish than it needed to be. Her border policies, fracking. It seems like Harris is very heavily tacking to the center and trying to bring this whole thing to a Clinton era proposition. It's hard to pin down. A lot of people are saying that Harris is specifically trying to appeal to Republican voters instead of the progressive ideals that she originally championed in her 2020 run, to the point where she even said that she would have a Republican in her cabinet, and her campaign even released a press release around that answer. Plus, the DNC's lack of a Palestinian speaker, a lot of this has blunted a lot of the freewheeling online momentum Harris once had when she started. Because let's be honest, she was cruising when there was less inter-party fighting. People like Hassan Piker have criticized her center tax, saying that progressive policies are very, very popular. Why doesn't she run on them? Other people think Biden is still pulling the strings somewhere. There's like a million theories. And amidst all those theories and the analysis and the punditry and people trying to figure out what's going on, there's also this giant study that dropped literally after the DNC that no one has been talking about for the last 3 weeks. Data for Progress, the day after the DNC, released this study analyzing the motives of swing voters, what they're looking for in candidates, how multiple issues that have not been polled for months have changed, and how they may affect this new dynamic in this very crazy election. And what's weird about this study is that all of the data and talking points and top lines from the study line up exactly with the entirety of Harris's speech. Like, I'm saying that I'm 80 to 90% sure that either this was an internal poll the Democrats did with Data for Progress that was just released, or somebody from the Harris campaign saw this study and modeled the entirety of the speech and messaging of her campaign around it. And if you are somebody who is invested in Gaza and what happens to people there, it also gives you a baseline of how to remix your pressure strategy in order to help those people and where the general public stands in terms of all of this. So let's talk about this study from Data for Progress, what it means, how the Harris campaign may be using it, and how to proceed forward if you have material investment in some of the topics present. And I will preface with this: because tensions are high, none of this of what I'm about to say is an explicit signing off or condemnation on the morals of the Harris pivot or her remarks on Gaza. This is analyzing the motivations of why something is happening politically to help understand the landscape that we are in and how to work within it. My personal feeling on Harris's rhetoric you can find in this Freestyle the News episode, where I go in for like 30 minutes on the whole thing. But any comments on morality or how I truly feel about what's going on in Gaza, I will make explicit. Like, I will directly tell you this is morally fucked up, but listen, that is not the purpose of this piece. This piece is to inform you and give you a better baseline of how to move forward with whatever you believe in. Okay, first things first. Survey was conducted from August 1st through the 15th, shortly after she picked up Tim Walz, and pressure about the specifics of her platform started to emerge. It had about 6,067 respondents, which is large, and a margin of error of around plus or minus 1 point. Really good poll. I also enjoyed the methodology, but I don't know what Nate Silver is going to say. In terms of demographics, a lot of the top line numbers match up pretty well with what was going on at the time, with favorability ratings of each candidate amongst all polled being pretty in line with the numbers coming out around mid-August. Okay, but about 464 of these respondents are swing voters, right? This is a likely voter poll, but 464 are swing voters, specifically the people who will probably decide the election. And there's a couple things you should know about these swing voters. Number one, swing voters are mad haters, right? They fucking hate everybody, like really don't like any of these candidates. The favorability on all three candidates ranges from -30 to -48, which is fucking bad, dude. Except for RFK, who's, you know, Take that for what you will. B, they are largely unenthusiastic about voting in this election. The larger sample size of all likely voters, about 54% are enthusiastic, 31% are normal, and 13% are not very enthusiastic. For swing voters, 17% are enthusiastic about voting in this election, 36% are about normal, and a whopping 40% are not happy about this shit. So that's who we're working with, mostly people who are just super unhappy with this. Among Harris-Trump swing voters, a plurality of about 38% voted for Donald Trump in 2020, with 36% saying they voted for Biden. That's pretty evenly split. But here's the thing. Data for Progress also notes that that's a 12% decrease from the Biden 2020 voters in their last survey they did when he was still in the race. So it means that Harris ended up bringing quite a few Biden voters back home into the party who were unsure about voting for him a second time. Now, in a two-way race, swing voters break for Trump. 34 to 28%, 38% unsure, which leaves a large margin for Harris to be able to win over, or Trump. But in a six-way race, 12% back Harris, 9% back Trump, 48% swing third party, and 31% aren't sure. Now, since RFK dropped out, it's been kind of hard to see where his support went, but most people analyzing it say it's a split like 60% to Trump, 40% to Harris. So if you want to do the math, five-way race, Trump at 31, Harris at 27 with 41% undecided. But that is a guesstimate. Like those aren't official numbers. Nobody really knows how the RFK vote will shake out or how it is shaking out currently. Most people say it'll be a wash. Okay, now here's where it gets interesting. The biggest thing swing voters look for when prioritizing a candidate to vote for is, quote, protecting our freedoms. Literally that phrase, protecting our freedoms. Hey, what's the term or the phrase that Kamala has been using for the last 4 weeks every time she has to speak publicly or give an interview?
Other fundamental freedoms are at stake. The freedom to live safe from gun violence in our schools, communities, and freedom to love who you love openly and with pride.
We choose freedom.
The freedom to breathe clean air.
Constantly saying, I will protect our freedom to do this, to do that, so that people have freedom, security. Harris has geared so much of her messaging around that phrase. And when swing voters were asked which candidate they feel more confident will fulfill that quote, Trump is leading that confidence there by 11 points, 38 to 27. Again, there's still a large majority open for her to win over. Now, I read that and I was like, okay, something's up here. That is a very interesting, specific coincidence. But wait, let's look at the other things present here, okay? Before we jump to conclusions. Number 2, honest. Harris is leading in that. Number 3, fighting for the working class. Specifically, those words, which are all over her fucking messaging everywhere. And she has an advantage against Trump on there. Okay, 2 out of 3. Sure. What could 4 be? Right? 4 would have to be something that's like really like out of left field, right? That is suddenly being emphasized, that is not like a normal Democratic talking point. 4 would have to be something just out of left field. What's number 4? Oh, bring order to the border.
Law enforcement, I know the importance of safety and security, especially at our border. Well, I refuse to play politics with our security. And here is my pledge to you. As president, I will bring back the bipartisan border security bill that he killed, and I will sign it into law.
I'm telling you, that border question, 100% sealed it for me. I am positive somebody saw this and made her focus on those 4 topics for most of the messaging. The 5th is mentally and physically competent, which Harris is leading 41 to 24, which... come on, dude. Like 30% of swing voters don't know which of these 2 people looks like a husk. Listen, Harris is not leading or expected to win on all of these points. On the border question, Trump is leading Harris by a margin of 46 points. There's still 30% undecided there, though. Now, in the likely voter part of the poll, when people are asked who they would choose for president with all the respondents, all 6,000 of them, she's leading that by 4. So if she could chip away just a few points on that advantage that Trump has and capture some of that don't know vote and narrow the margin just a little bit, that will benefit her immensely. This is old school fundamental politics. And by her strategy and the messaging and everything around the DNC, that seems very apparent. The entire weirdness of why the fuck are some of these people on stage makes a lot more fucking sense after reading this survey. But look, here's the thing. That's not all that was asked. They also asked swing voters What is the top policy that would make you definitely vote for Harris? They didn't do one for Trump because they didn't remember, or I'm completely right, and this was 100% a fucking internal poll. Okay, the top issue that would make swing voters definitely vote for Kamala Harris is expanding Medicare coverage to include vision, dental, and hearing. She talks extensively about Obamacare and healthcare. It's a cornerstone. She's been hitting Donald Trump on it constantly in his plan to repeal Obamacare. Number two is increased border security, which lines up with how much she is emphasizing this fucking bill and how that bill is apparently the second coming of Jesus. I'll say here, I don't like that border bill. It is bipartisan. It feels like in name only. It's written by assholes. It feels kind of xenophobic, and it needs to be adjusted heavily. But the border security part lines up with her rhetoric and her choices. Raises taxes on the wealthy. Unrealized capital gains tax, which has been an enormous discussion for 2 weeks. She also pivoted a little bit recently because I think maybe some of these voters started to get a little bit apprehensive of how much wealthy people would be taxed. So she adjusted the percentage from 40 to 28, I think. Increased protections for abortion, raises the minimum wage. All of these are major chunks she can capture with direct messaging. But if you go down the list, there are quite a few pieces and subjects that we haven't gotten a lot of polling on recently, right? And one of those things is conditioning military aid to Israel based on human rights violations. That is the specific thing that was asked. Shout out to Data for Progress for actually fucking polling this. But what is it? What is the actual percentage that would definitely vote for Harris? Swing voters who would lock that in if she conditioned military aid to Israel based on human rights violations. 4%. That is infuriating. It is disappointing. Those are the numbers. Again, maybe it changes, right? There's been a ton of news over the last few weeks, especially with what's going on with those hostages dying and the protests that are going on in Israel, and more messaging about how Netanyahu is unhinged. About fucking time. But suddenly, a lot of these decisions, which have been infuriating to watch, come into focus quite a bit more. Here's the thing. Earlier in the survey, amongst likely voters, Trump is leading her on Israel-Gaza. It's not a don't know. Trump is leading. The guy who used Palestinian as a fucking slur. And if you look into the other data on this survey and look into why people would not vote for Harris, right? The top answers are, I don't know enough about her. Harris can't manage the border. Again, what the fucking border? Harris didn't do enough as vice president. Harris is too liberal. Harris was chosen by the elites. Go all the way down. Specifically, the point, Harris is too conservative, which is what you hear many of the detractors of her speech saying now with their frustrations. 4%. I need this to be clear. Polls are snapshots. They're not the gospel. But over the past 8 election cycles, even including when there were systematic errors here and there, polls were incredibly helpful at predicting and studying demographic trends and vote share. And this is a big poll with a lot of data that matches up demographically pretty well. And again, I have heard multiple places from polls that a majority of people disapprove of Israel's conduct in this war. And I want that to be 100% true because it is a weight on my conscience. But also, brand new polling around this. This is newer than the CBS News poll. This poll was conducted June 21st to July 1st, as well as August 9th to 11th. Says that 6 in 10 Americans favor aid to Israel until the hostages are released. That's 60%. That is an insane number in a poll. Now, in that same survey, many people feel that Israel has gone overboard and is now directly targeting civilians, right? And only about 30% favor unwavering support. Alongside the 30% that wants to halt arms shipments, 30 would also rather use diplomacy or the tactics going on right now. Those two groups of 30 is a little unheard of, like in around this subject. But overall, the data somewhat lines up. So what does this mean for Palestinians, the uncommitted movement, leftists? Does it mean give up on Kamala Harris? Does it mean vote blue no matter who and you're just really helping Trump win if you don't do any of this stuff? Here's the thing about polls. They are invaluable because they give you a baseline on how people feel, what messaging is working, right? And where we're currently at. And when you look at what we're up against, and what we're doing to stop what's going on in Palestine and how activism is being effectively used, you can adjust your strategy based on these numbers in a way that makes sense and is effective. Here's my opinion. I don't trust politicians. Like, in general, I've said that a bunch on the show. I just don't implicitly trust politicians. If I think a politician is doing well, I don't trust them. I trust their incentives. Screaming, "You don't care about genocide," isn't effectively working. I'm not trying to dog you. I'm just looking at the numbers and trying to make an assessment. All right? People clearly don't like this war, but screaming that somebody doesn't care about genocide, which is absurd. Most people don't like genocide when they understand what's going on and what it means, right? Against all the propaganda that they're fed, right? In order to make people more activist, you have to change your tack. And I'm not trying to tone police you. I just don't want this shit to keep going on. Specifically, the deaths of Palestinian children and all of this shit. What is effective, though, is messaging on strategies that might work and abuses that are happening. So things like Netanyahu is hosing Israelis in the streets, or the IDF may kill all the hostages in their pursuit of Hamas, or the IDF is targeting Palestinians, those messages are sticking, and those messages are upsetting people who are polled. And when you have a broad swath of those people who all have all of these messaging points coalesce and those make headlines, politicians move. And again, I am not trying to ask you to unconditionally support Kamala Harris. I'm frustrated that I have to constantly say that. I'm trying to explain to you why the electoral calculus is what it is. It's better to understand what's going on than just be in the dark of why the fuck is this hurricane happening. Yes, progressive policies are popular, but they aren't front in mind of most swing voters. And in order to make them front of mind, you have to effectively communicate the stakes and not shame people into them. People already feel shame about this. They need to feel motivated to do something about it. And that's a whole fucking different emotion. This is basic marketing and sales, by the way. This is how that shit works, right? There's only so much you can scare people into or shame them into. They have to have an activist streak if they're going to buy your product or engage with your content or vote for you. And watching people scold others about genocide while supporting a candidate who was cool with somebody gassing his own people and another motherfucker starving them and rigging his own election, fuck you, Jill, is disgusting to me. I don't want to watch bombs drop on innocent people no more. I don't want this fat piece of shit opening his dumb yuck mouth to say stupid shit anymore. I'm tired of the BS. The majority of Americans have shifted to the left on progressive issues, but the context and the messaging and the way all of this plays out politically needs to be different. Because of this system we're in. I know it's fucking unfair. I fucking hate this shit, bro. And if you want to do more than just vote in November, or if you want strategies around community, maybe building messaging points that can reasonably switch or flip people, right, is probably a good idea, right? That's not just for leftists, by the way. A lot of neoliberals shame a lot of people who are leftists, or a lot of people who are frustrated with what's going on in Gaza. And that's also got to stop. That's not fucking helping anybody. We're in for an insane final stretch of this election, right? And things are going to get closer and more stuff is going to come out. But these are the numbers. Let's work off them, right? And let's see who we can push to do the right thing, what we can say to help move the discussion forward, and what we can do besides the same old shit. That's our show. I look forward to random people on TikTok taking it out of context. Again, I'm just giving you the political calculus. Even if you hate where I stand on things, use the numbers. Use that we both don't want bad shit to happen to people. Use them. I hope you use them well. You can like, comment, subscribe. You can go watch Freestyle the News. And anyway, my name is Tabani. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see y'all soon. Let's go.